Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
A changing world needs a changing State Department, and that requires the workforce to keep up. Last month, the State Department marked what it called Modernization Week to summarize and crow a little bit about how things have changed under Secretary Antony Blinken. Joining me to review the list, someone with two hats. She's the Director General of the Foreign Service and Director of Global Talent at the State Department, Marcia Bernicat. Ms. Bernicat, good to have you with us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And let's begin with the basic transformation question relative to a few years ago. State Department has a few more employees, FTEs, than it did to start with.
That's correct. And a good chunk of those additional FTEs went to our priority areas. One, to bolstering the workforce that works on all aspects of our relationship with China and the challenges therein. And another good chunk has gone to helping develop more programs to professionally develop our workforce and represent us more thoroughly.
And let's talk about China, because one of the things that the Secretary mentioned when he marked that week of transformation was something called China House within the State Department. And that sounds like a all-of-state effort, if you will, to bring to bear on China. What's that all about, and what does it do?
Tom, your characterization is perfect. Modeled in some ways after the old Russia House, the idea was to centralize a set of people who bring diverse skills, not just knowledge about China, which of course is key, not just Chinese language skills, also key, but also people who have a background in high tech, in emerging technologies, in political military issues, across the spectrum, where they can centralize the work that is being done on this end, back here in Washington, on cooperating with China where we can or should, competing where we have to, and then countering where we must, actions out in the field. But I should also say that China House is aided by a large staff, not only deployed in China itself, but China watchers posted around the world, because China has been very active in expanding its presence around the globe.
Yes, China is really, I guess, a very different case than Cold War USSR, because, yes, rivals, military rivals, hegemony rivals around the world, but we didn't do $1 trillion of trade with the Soviet Union like we do with China.
Exactly. And they are, for example, also going to be a key to helping slow the warming of the planet. And so, a lot of our efforts, they are a key in helping countering the trade in fentanyl. So, yes, there are a number of things we are compelled to work together on.
I guess we need each other in some deep, fundamental way. And another effort that I wanted to ask you about was the subnational diplomacy unit, closer ties with mayors, governors, people you don't tend to think of except when they go on economic development trips, junkets we call them, as being connected that much to the State Department of all things federal.
Thank you so much for pointing that out. Part of our training float, our new training float, has gone to deploying diplomats and civil service employees to these what we call subnational programs. So many of the countries that we interact with in the world are the issues that they face and the solutions that can be found are more analogous to what our governors and our mayors are doing. In a number of the countries I've served in, the partnerships they've developed with unlikely places like Oregon and Vermont for Bangladesh and Senegal, there were not only trade issues, which you're right, a lot of places think of trade first, but also things like police training and developing cultural programs. And so by embedding, again, employees for a year or longer in these domestic offices, we can more supercharge those efforts.
We're speaking with Marcia Bernicat. She's Director General of the Foreign Service and Director of Global Talent at the State Department. And I didn't see this specifically on the list, but what about strengthening interoperability, if you will, with the Defense Department? I keep recalling something former Secretary Bob Gates said back in the Obama administration: to be better militarily, we need more partnership with State Department. That's always kind of stuck with me.
Absolutely. Well, I have to say, during especially the war on terror and I was out in the field for a good part of that time, our U.S. military counterparts were key to helping build the capacity in our host countries, but also in other ways. Actually, before the Gulf Wars, I was serving in Malawi, a country that was emerging from a 30-year dictatorship. And our military deployed humanitarian assistance teams to work with a lot of different elements of Malawi. But the one that really struck me was that they worked with their military counterparts in the war against AIDS. And it not only helped transform the military's role in that country from being an enforcer of a dictator to being a Republican, if you will, with the small R army. People could actually see the value that their military could bring to them and literally their lives. So our partnerships have strengthened. We have a number of political advisors from early mid-level employees all the way up to former ambassadors who work side by side with our counterparts in the commands.
And in that idea of modernization, there have been a couple of internal changes or restorations at state for the workforce itself. Two things: launched the Policy Ideas Channel and revitalized, that's Secretary Blinken's word, the Dissent Channel. These sound like internal communications to bubble up things that need bubbling up.
Exactly. And actually, the Secretary also revived a third mechanism, the open forum, where speakers are brought in to talk about different aspects. You know, Tom, we have, by design and intention, not only increased our hiring over the last couple of years, but we've intentionally gone to every corner of this country to capture the breadth and the richness of the American people. We want that same diversity in every sense of the word, not just race and gender, represented among our ranks. Why? Because they bring different perspectives, different experiences, different backgrounds to the most complex set of problems that we've ever had to deal with in the world. And yes, there are the normal ways of, contributing to memos and providing briefings to our decision makers. But these three channels allow people to hear, especially, or express contrarian opinion. And the Secretary is really proud of, and we are as well, that if you write a dissent channel cable, and by the way, the dissent channel isn't to just complain about what you don't like about a policy. It's your opportunity to say to the Secretary, have you thought about this? How about doing it this way? He reads and approves. He reads every incoming message and he approves every outgoing response to those. I think, we're a younger force. I mean that mostly by seniority, but you mentioned the hiring at the start. Since March of 2020, and I use that date because that's when we went into quarantine for COVID, we've hired over 2,500 Foreign Service officers, the most we've hired since 2011, and over a third of our civil service now, and that represents about 25% of our Foreign Service, about 33% of the civil service have been hired since that time. That's a lot of new people who may or may not understand well how foreign policy is made. Not every good idea is adopted. Our policy doesn't turn on a dime, hardly ever. But we don't have that ongoing dialogue so that people's minds can be changed, particularly over time, then we'll be missing a key element of our very competitiveness in the world.
And just from a standpoint of practicality, you're using direct hiring authorities more. There's been some internship